This is the last lecture in the Period 6 series of lectures. This concerns the populist movement that will change American history drastically, first on the farmers, in the farmers' way of life, but then will move into cities through eventually the larger progressive era. So as we've discussed, farms are experiencing some problems. Farmers are experiencing problems. Many farmers lose their jobs because new inventions, and they actually get almost too efficient at producing things. So many farmers who are working there will lose their jobs, including African Americans. There's lack of competition among railroads because of many of the powerful railroad magnates like Rockefeller. Machinery is needed, and shipping costs are higher, and money is in short supply. The effects of these issues are that farm products decline, or the prices of them. Farmers' earnings decrease, and they are unable to pay back loans that they took out for their land, for their new inventions, to pay shipping costs, and banks will lend money to fewer farmers because now farmers are starting to prove that they are incapable of paying these loans back. So it's almost like if they had a credit score at this point, their credit score is decreasing, and farmers will not get loans from banks anymore. So as you can see here, farmers are receiving, prior to about 1875, farmers are receiving a more than they pay for their purchases. By 1880 or so, you'll see that is starting to change. It will last through most of the later 19th century and into some of the 20th century, including when we get to the Great Depression. So farmers have some complaints. Tariffs did help farmers because they did protect them from competition against other countries sending farm imports here. But they also hurt farmers because they had to raise the prices of farm machinery because they could only get them from here. So the companies that produced the machinery could raise their prices because they basically had a monopoly over this. So farmers had to take out many loans in order to buy the machinery that was necessary to produce their goods. One of the largest issues was their problems with railroads. There was a lack of competition, as we've been talking about, with the robber barons or captains of industry, and they would had be overcharged to transport mostly their grain. So farmers mortgaged to buy supplies, and suppliers charged high interest rates, and all this means that they are not, as the farm prices decrease, they're not making enough money to pay back these mortgages or loans, and they can't afford to transport their goods on the railroads. Their third major issue was the money issue. Farmers wanted an increase in the money supply, or the amount of money in the national economy. They thought that if the value of every dollar dropped, it would lead to widespread rise in prices or inflation. As there's more money, prices rise. This would help them because they would get higher prices for their products. This trend would benefit people who had to borrow money, farmers, but it would not be good for money lenders, banks, because what they owned would now be less valuable if banks owned money. So there's a competition again between kind of the common man, the farmers, and the industrialists and the wealthy people who owned the banks. So to get this issue going, they started a movement to support the use of gold coins instead of silver. If we use a bimetallic standard consisting of gold and silver, there would be more money out there, and it would cause inflation, meaning that prices would rise. This is the same issue that was basically going on under the Jacksonian democracy with the National Bank, so it's still an issue by the 1880s and 1890s. However, the banks did not support this and wanted to continue using only the gold to back its money supply, just stick with the gold standard. Silver was mined out in the West, so Western miners supported the silver, so there's an Eastern-Western kind of controversy here. So it had a very regional component. It pitted these poor farmers against wealthy bankers, the kind of a class struggle, and the elite versus the common man, which we've been seeing since the Jeffersonian and Jacksonian democracies. And you can see in this cartoon that is kind of against bimetallism because they thought that it would cause issues and be too hard to control the money supply with two metals. So we get the Bland-Allison Act of 1878. It's kind of aptly named as Bland. The gold standard enraged the civil rights, which is what this Bland-Allison Act creates. And it was mostly silver mining interests in Western farmers. So the civil rights called for free silver and the unlimited coining of silver dollars to increase the money supply. The federal government was to purchase and coin more silver, thereby increasing the money supply and causing inflation. It is vetoed by President Rutherford B. Hayes because he opposed inflation. Congress overrides the veto, and the Treasury Department refuses refuses to buy more than the minimum amount of silver required by the act. So even though it gets what the civil rights or what the populists, as they'll eventually be called, want, it doesn't really affect and doesn't really change much for them. So a few years later, we get the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890, so it increases the amount of silver that the government was required to purchase every month, and it required the Treasury to buy the silver with notes that could be redeemed for either silver or gold, so again, helping out these farmers. Many people turned to their silver Treasury notes for gold dollars, thus depleting the gold reserves and causing gold to become more valuable. So President Cleveland pushed for the succeeding and repealing of the Silver Purchase Act, and new gold mines allowed for the U.S. to go back to the gold standard. So again, kind of ends up being a loss for the civil rights. This money issue does create kind of a national organization, though, because it was not just farmers, it was miners, it was poor people kind of across the country. They are able to unite under what they will call the Grange Movement. And by 1875, there were more than 1 million members, but they started out as cooperatives. The purpose was to allow farmers to buy machinery and sell crops as a group, and therefore reap the benefits of economies of scale, meaning that as they sell a larger quantity, their profit margin is larger, and they will be able to kind of shift out that money to different farmers as a group, more so than if they were selling independently. Soon they began to endorse political candidates, and they eventually lobby for legislation. As when they reach 1 million members, they start to become a legitimate group that can start to change American society. And they start to produce things about, the farmer pays for all, and they pay for all these things, and they will also have cartoons and images showing that they provide for all, that everyone eats, so therefore the farmer, is really a very sacred job because they provide for everyone. So the Granges will eventually die out because of the lack of money. They become the Farmers Alliance, but eventually they become the People's Party, or a populist movement. So a political movement from the ground up, from the people up, and we'll start to see how they start to push for some changes to benefit themselves. So by 1889, we're seeing the northern and southern differences kind of go away because they merge into this Farmers Alliance, all basically started by this bimetallism issue. So the People's Party, or the Populists, actually gained enough support to run for president in 1892. They called for a generous coinage of silver, obviously. They wanted government to own railroads and telegraphs so that they could better regulate the prices of railroads. And they demanded for a graduated income tax and direct election of U.S. senators and shorter workdays. Most of these things, the income tax, direct election of senators, and shorter workdays, will all eventually be achieved, but not necessarily by the populists. Although their 1892 election they came in third, their candidate did win 9% of the popular vote. So substantial when, most people were only voting for Democrats or Republicans, showing you that a third party can be significant if it has the right backing. So this starts at a local level, as we talked about with the Grange movement, and it pressures local governments to do things. They're pretty successful there. The People's Movement eventually spreads. It becomes this Farmer Alliance, becoming kind of a sectional group in both northern and southern farmers, and it will eventually become more substantial national group when they have the People's Party, or the Populists, and they will run presidential candidates again, as we said, in 1892, but also 1896. So again, they're not winning these elections, but you can see that generally out in the Midwest and the far West, you're seeing these populists gain some support. So as people are moving out there and expecting some fair prices as they become farmers or miners, etc., it's mostly a Western and Midwestern party. You're not seeing any wins here for them in the East, but that will change. So James B. Weaver is their first presidential candidate. And he is kind of the founder of the Populist, or People's Party. It's founded in Omaha, Nebraska, again, kind of that Midwest ideal, at this convention in July of 1892. They get almost 1 million popular votes, a substantial amount of votes, and they do get some congressional seats won, even though they lose the national presidential election. So they are looking for a growth in democracy, so almost like a continuation of that Jeffersonian, Jacksonian democracy of more people involved. So they wanted women's suffrage. They will not get that until about 1920. They wanted the direct election of U.S. senators. At this point, U.S. senators were chosen from the people who were elected by state houses. So people did not directly elect U.S. senators. That will eventually change. They also wanted term limits for Congress, not that not the amount of years, but the amount of terms they could Congress persons could serve. That will not happen, but some people still push for that. They wanted government ownership of railroads, telephone and telegraph companies. They wanted an income tax, which is not in existence at this point in American history. They wanted two things called an initiative and referendum. An initiative was when citizens could propose new legislation, and a referendum was when they could actually vote on new legislation. They will eventually get that through the Progressive Era. Restriction of undesirable immigration. So they're anti-immigrant. So that's not necessarily the best part of them, but that's obviously because of competition for jobs. They're looking for the 8-hour workday for any government employee, and they demand the free and unlimited coinage of silver, as we talked about. They wanted a single term for president and vice president because, again, they felt that these people, whether they be congressmen or presidents, stay too long and don't necessarily have to listen to the people that way. So they're, again, more democracy. They wanted the Sherman Silver Purchase Act with a 16-to-1 ratio, 16 pieces of silver for every 1 piece of gold. And they wanted a purchase of silver from mines in the West. So you see this money issue, the type of money we're going to use is going to be substantial in creating this group and sustaining this group. So Grover Cleveland takes office in 1893, and we enter a 4-year financial crisis that will substantially destroy the American economy. These hard economic times made populist goals more popular because they're kind of the outsiders and they're pushing for things that would benefit the lower classes, and particularly the call for easy money would have helped these people during this crisis in 1893. Most people at the time, after all, had no money at all, so any money would have helped these people. And times got so bad that even more progressive or even radical movements gained popularity. So in 1894, the socialists and Eugene V. Debs gained support. And we'll see this as we get into later periods in American history with the Red Scare and the Cold War, that we are afraid of poor economic time periods causing a growth in extreme governments like socialism or communism. We will eventually try to stop that through the Cold War, not necessarily at home, but in other developing nations. So as this depression gets so bad, the populists rebel, and Jacob Coxey of Ohio and some 20,000 men and women begin to march on Washington. They demand government public works programs and mainly railroads for the nation's unemployed. So they want the government to help these people get out of the poverty that they are in. This is not the way the government works at this point. It won't be really doing that until somewhat in the Progressive Era and really more in the New Deal during the Great Depression. So it's going to be a while before the government will really assist these people. We're still in the rugged individualism and laissez-faire phase. So of the 20,000, about 600 actually get to Washington, and they walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, and as Coxey is about to deliver this historic speech, he is arrested by the district police simply for walking on the grass. So it's not really a legitimate arrest, but the government does not want to hear this guy, and the government does not want him speaking on government property or anything to do with the government, because they do not support the ideas of the government stepping in and helping these people at this point in history.